Hi, I'm Leslie Avancino, and our family farms in the Linden, California area, which is just east of Lodi and Stockton. Our family's farmed here for 5 generations. My sons will be the 5th generation working on our family farm. Today we're going to talk about the life cycle of a cherry and the importance of it to our local economy. The cherry is the shortest growing crop of all of the crops grown in our area. It grows basically from April until May and June when it gets harvested. Let's start at the beginning of the year. In the winter time is when the trees are dormant. And dormancy usually goes from November to January. During that time, the trees are not dead. They are storing up energy and getting ready to produce cherries in the springtime. When the cherries come out of dormancy in February, they start budding. At that point, the farmers will take an estimate of the buds on the tree. They start very small and then they get much bigger and eventually bloom. When the farmers estimate the buds, they're doing this so that they can get an idea of the size of the crop and the equipment and preparation that is going to need to be done to harvest the crop. When budding is done, that happens in February. March is our bloom month. That's the beginning of spring. In the springtime when the flowers show up, there's an important part of the farming community, and it happens to be the bee. He's the most important because he has to pollinate every single flower for there to be a cherry there. The bees show up in a big semi-truck and the forklifts move them all around the field so that they are evenly distributed throughout the orchard. The bees like nice weather. They like 70 degrees, sunny and beautiful. If it's foggy, rainy, sleet, freezing, any of that, they don't like to come out of the boxes, and so your crop is in danger because they're not out pollinating the flowers. If all goes well and the bees got to pollinate your crop, the petals start falling off of the trees and it looks like snow underneath the orchard. Then the farmers go back and you'll start seeing little green buds that are cherries. They take another estimate on the green buds, the green cherries. And they do this so that they compare to previous years. They compare to their first estimate. They use this to get a better idea of what the crop is going to look like. This is no guarantee that the green cherries on there are still going to be available to harvest when they're red. Some of the issues that can happen in between are weather related. When the cherries are green and we get a hard wind or sleet or hail, they can get damaged and the crop gets wrecked. When the cherries are nearing ripening, sometimes the weather is not helpful. It might be too cold. There might be an oncoming rainstorm. And so the farmers will assist the ripening process by laying down reflective plastic underneath the trees in the rows so that the light reflects up and underneath the crop and it makes it ripen quicker. When the cherries are ripe and on the trees, there still can be problems. If we get rain or hail when the cherries are ripe, there's a little crevice where the stem meets the cherry that acts like a little cup and it absorbs all the water. The farmers go to great lengths to preserve their harvestable crop, and so they'll send the spray rigs out to blow dry their crop. Another way they do it is using a helicopter. And the helicopters will fly 4 to 10 feet above the tree line and basically blow dry the tops of the trees and it gets all the water off of it. The problem with that is that it costs a lot of money to hire people to go blow dry your crops. The helicopters are $1,500 an hour starting, plus fuel, to fly over your crops. That's an added expense that gets added on to the cost of doing business. What happens to the cherries when the farmers are not able to get the rainwater off of the trees is they absorb the water and then they split. That makes them unmarketable. A lot of farmers have crop insurance, which only covers their expenses. It does not make for any profit. Once the cherries are ready to be harvested, at 4 a.m. the next morning you'll know that the field is going to be harvested because the ladders show up, the porta potties show up, and all the tubs. The pickers start showing up about 4:30, and as soon as it's bright enough outside to see, they start picking. They're given a bucket like this one and a punch card, and they fill their buckets up, and every time they get their buckets filled up, they punch their card. The price is negotiated per season and per orchard because of the quantity of the available fruit and the availability of employees. Picking is very hard work. This bucket here will hold about 10 pounds of cherries. So just imagine if you were carrying your mom's 10-pound bag of potatoes, how hard that is. Just imagine climbing up and down the ladders all day long with this bucket. When you're a piecework worker, if you're slow, you won't make a lot of money. These workers are very fast and they can make a lot of money in a season. When you're picking cherries, you want to leave the stems on. The fruit will last longer in your refrigerator, have a longer shelf life if the stems are attached. So when they're picking cherries, they have to pick them with the steps on. Once the cherries are harvested and dumped into the bigger tubs, they go to the packing shed. At the packing shed, they're tagged with the farm location and the grower, and those numbers they're tagged with will follow them all the way to the stores. That is a method of food safety in case there was a problem with the crop.
Hi, my name is Scott Brown. I'm the production manager at Murata Produce Company. We're a grower, packer, shipper of California cherries. We're very excited because it's May, and that means it's time to start harvesting California cherries. We're standing in an orchard in Linden, California today, but most of our harvest this time of year is coming from Southern California, and so we're starting in Bakersfield and places like Gustine and Patterson on cherries that are just starting to ripen. So what is exciting about California cherries and what makes us special is that we're the first cherries harvested in the Northern Hemisphere every year. And so no one in the world has had cherries since January. So in the Southern Hemisphere, places like Chile and Australia and New Zealand, they harvest during our winter time, and then we begin harvest here in May every year. It's very exciting because there is a low supply and therefore high demand, and we're able to make a good return to California cherry growers that are picking cherries this time of year. What's exciting is that we've had a very cold winter this last year. That cold winter allowed all the trees to go fully to sleep or into dormancy. When cherry trees get a lot of sleep, they produce a very nice bloom. And so every year in the month of March, we have a big bloom in California where all of the California cherries push flowers, and we place beehives in the orchards to go around and pollinate all those flowers. And so the good rest that the cherries got during the winter led to a very nice bloom, which has led to good pollination, which has led to a ton of cherries in the trees. And so we're very excited to begin picking those cherries here in the coming weeks. What happens during a cherry harvest is that we send people with ladders into an orchard just like this one. They'll climb up those ladders and they'll pick every individual cherry by hand. We want to make sure that they pull the stem off with the cherry and that they put them individually inside a bucket that they wear on their chest, and then they dump those buckets into bins on the ground. Those bins are delivered to the packing facility where we begin cooling the cherries. We begin making sure that the heat from the sun and from the outside is removed from the fruit, because that's going to lead to a longer shelf life. Cold cherries stay fresher longer, and so it's very important to store your cherries in the refrigerator, and it's very important to keep those cherries cool while you pack them. A typical cherry harvest, say, occurs on a Monday morning. We like picking the cherries really before the sun comes up or right as the sun is coming up, because the cherries are still cool from the evening. And so we'll pick all morning long. Once it starts getting warm in the afternoon, we'll stop picking. The cherries tend to get a little bit softer, and we can damage them if we pull them off of the tree in the middle of the day. And so we'll pick on Monday morning, for example. We will bring those cherries to the packing facility. If we plan to export those cherries into different markets of the world, we'll need to fumigate them that night. The next morning we bring them out of fumigation, we'll run them on Tuesday morning. By Tuesday night, they're getting on an airplane. And so they're flying over the ocean into markets all around the world where they're really in demand. Our job at the packing shed is to make sure that we maximize the value for all of the cherries that have been picked off of the tree by hand. And so it's very important that we separate every grower's fruit individually through the packing lines. Where that starts is at the bin dump. As we bring the cherries out of the cooler onto the processing line, we weigh every single bin and all of the contents inside of it to make sure that we tell the grower where his product ended up. First thing we do is we submerge that bin into a tank of cold water, which very gently removes those cherries from the bin. Cherries that have sugar and are good quality will sink in water. Sticks, leaves, and cherries that don't have any sugar, or white cherries, will float to the top. And so that's the quickest way that we can separate those things away from the good fruit. California cherries are an amazing specialty crop in that the way that we process them, we produce very little, if not zero, byproducts. So I explained how sticks and leaves float to the surface of the water when we dump all the raw cherries in there. We'll collect those up and put them into a bin, and then we'll take those out to a goat pasture or something like that to spread them, just use as compost or as feed. Now, the other byproducts that we generate as a processing facility are little tiny undersized cherries. They're not big enough to really eat as a fresh product, and so we put those in a bin and then we send them off for juice. And so they'll go to a place that will crush them and take the cherry juice out of them and use it as an ingredient in other products. The cherries that don't have any color, that are really light colored pink, they don't have a lot of sugar, they don't taste very good, they'll be sold into maraschino cherries. And so they'll go for further processing, and you'll find those on your ice cream sundae. The last byproduct that we generate are culls. And so these cherries might have been rotten or had something wrong with them. They'll go into secondary markets, and they're oftentimes used as ingredients inside of granola bars or in mixes. And so when anything that has dried cherries or that has processed cherries or cherry juice will come from one of our sheds. So that really produces 0 cherries that aren't consumed in some way. The other thing is we use a lot of water inside of the sheds. We clean the fruit with the water, we cool the cherries with water, and so it's very important to us that we do something with that water. We will pump it out of our packing lines into a pond on our property and irrigate our walnuts with it. This is a very important season for walnut irrigation to maximize the quality in that specialty crop, and so we use all of our wastewater from the shed to do that. The good cherries sink to the bottom of the tank and are carried out of it with a conveyor belt that leads to the most important, or the first step of the process, being the cluster cutter. We need to separate the cherries from their clusters. Now, we use a machine with a conveyor belt that carries the cherries and little fingers that will pick up the stems right at the top. And then there's a saw blade that's spinning up here that will separate every individual cherry one by one so that they all have a stem. This is important because we need to isolate and individualize the cherries before we sort them. If a good cherry is attached to a bad cherry, it might both end up in the bad. And so by putting them one at a time across the optical sorter, we're able to get the right cherries into the right boxes. And so after cluster cutting, we begin hydrocooling. Again, keeping the fruit cold is very important for keeping the fruit fresh and firm and good to eat for a long time. And so we spend 5 minutes raining cold water over the top of the cherries, 32 degrees, almost ice cold. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to pull the heat out of the cherry. It has a little pit on the inside, which does a really good job of holding that heat. And so by cooling the flesh around that pit, we'll slowly bring the temperature of that stone down. So after we cool the cherries, it's time to sort them. We use a really interesting piece of equipment to sort the cherries. So we will put every cherry onto its own cup, and then we will use cameras to take a lot of pictures of those cherries. So we get 36 pictures of every single cherry that goes across the line. The things that we're looking for, simply separating dark colored cherries from light ones. We can separate big ones from small ones. And most importantly, we're separating good ones from bad ones. Things that may happen in the orchard is, say, a bird starts eating on one of the cherries, or insects damage it by laying their eggs inside of it, or maybe it's just diseased and it never grows up to be a good tasting cherry. The cameras can analyze each picture and figure out which cherries are the best to eat. Those are the only cherries that we put into the box to make sure that we have a box that is very valuable to the customer that's buying it. So we end up putting the big cherries with the big cherries, and the little cherries with the little cherries, and the dark ones with the dark ones, and the light ones with the light ones, and each one of those have a special market. And so depending on where we're going to sell those cherries, whether it's in a grocery store or whether we're going to sell them into restaurants, we put them in different packaging. So it's very important that we have a lot of different machines that can put the right cherries into the right packaging to maximize that return to the grower that grew and picked those delicious cherries. It's important that after we pack the cherries, we make sure that those cartons, those boxes full of fruit, are as cold as possible. The best way to do that is to take the pallets of packed boxes and we put them inside of a cooler. We make 2 lanes of pallets in front of a fan. We pull a tarp out over the top of those pallets to create a tunnel. Then when we turn that fan on, it sucks all the cold air out of the room through the cherries back into the refrigeration system, basically forcing that temperature down to 32 degrees before we ship them so that they last long and taste good for a long time.
The reason the size of the cherry matters is because our customers like different size cherries. The larger ones go to our export market and for gourmet restaurants and high-end grocery stores. The ones over here tend to go to the regular grocery store that your mom and dad shop at. These smaller ones are for street vendors, farmers markets, and juicing. Each is a different price. In the afternoon, the parking lot at the packing shed fills up with big semi-trucks. Now the reason these big semi-trucks are here is they're going to take these packaged cherries to their destinations. Some of them might be a distribution center for a large chain grocery store, and some may be going to different states, Washington, Oregon, ones that are close by. But then some of the trucks go to the airport. The reason they're going to the airport is because we ship them to the East Coast and all over the world. So let's think about the timeline that these cherries have had for one day. They were picked in the morning, and by noontime they were headed to the packing shed where they were being cleaned, processed, and sorted. And by 5 o'clock in the afternoon they're being loaded onto semi-trucks, and they were going to their destinations across the United States and the world in one day. It's a miracle that that is able to happen in our society. We do this so that our customers are getting a healthy quality product in a short amount of time, because the cherries have a very short shelf life. So it is important that we get it to the customers quickly. Let's talk about the economy for a minute. When I talk about the economy, I'm talking about the importance of it and money in our local community, meaning Lodi, Stockton, Ripon, etc. The crop that the farmers got paid for was worth over $88 million. But the farmer doesn't get that. He pays his employees for the year, he pays his mortgage, he pays his insurance, gas, fuel, electric. But the most important thing is the taxes. The taxes support our community here. The farmers' taxes go towards paying for all of our local government, the county hospital, police department, fire department, your teacher's salary, or teacher's retirement. It pays for your schools being maintained, building new schools. All of this comes from farm taxes. So it's very important for our local community. Cherries are just an example, but agriculture in general is our #1 business. Now, let's talk a little bit about where these cherries are going. When they go to the airport, it's called export when they get sent out of the United States. It's import when we buy stuff from other countries. But Korea, Japan, Canada, those are some of our biggest exports, and it's huge in our market. At the end of the season, after the cherries have been harvested, the farmer continues to take care of his crops by watering and maintaining them through the rest of the year so that they will be surviving till the next cherry season. When you're out shopping with your parents, it would be really helpful if you pay attention to where your food comes from. Read the labels on the backs of the packaging and see where it's coming from. If it's from the United States, it's from a local community. We need to support our local growers. And while you're reading the back of the package, take notice of how healthy cherries are. They're full of antioxidants, vitamin C, potassium. They're good for diabetes and regulating it. Cherries are one of the most healthful crops there are, or fruits that there are. In the same way that your parents and your teacher and the police and your doctor take care of you, farmers take care of us as well. So thank you.